The greatest risk of all would be to demonstrate that we have no ability whatsoever to punish genocide.
The neocon question is a really interesting one.
This empire is in trouble internally.
The US empire, it's a grift.
It's a pay to play system. That's how this thing works.
It seems like the Muslim community is maturing.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim. Today I've got very special guests, Imam Facchine and Mobeen Vaid, who are joining us from the United States. It's a very early morning for you guys, so jazakallah khair for joining me.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair for having us.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, it's wonderful to have you with us. Now, I want today to be really a free-flowing conversation between us about, I suppose, the more deeper questions, the strategic and tactical questions post-election. I mean, you've been through what is really a few months, a good number of months of campaigning, and both of you took certain positions on the election campaign, and now it's time to take a step back and to think ahead and think about where the Muslim community is in America. I mean, I've got some questions that I want answered about the tactical decisions that were made during the election campaign, but also maybe some more deeper questions like how do we navigate our Islamic obligations within sort of within the constant demands of a secular society or secular polity, and whether really political participation can procure the types of results we all believe or we think it can give us as a Muslim community. I also want to talk about the Zionist lobby and how many Muslims may refer to Zionism, or at least the tactics of the Zionist lobby, as a model for our form of political participation. And then there's a discussion about Trump's America. As you know, I had a conversation with Sami Hamdi recently about Trump's America, but I think there are some questions that yet we require answers to. And I suppose these are questions about, will Trump be favorable towards Muslims domestically and internationally? And I suspect the jury's out on that. But also questions about whether Trump reflects something genuinely new in American society. Is he a comprehensive departure from that 1945 liberal world order globalist consensus that both parties subscribe to for the last few decades? So look, Jazakallah khair, thank you very much. There's a lot to talk through today. And I suppose let's start with the backdrop of the US elections. Well, at least the US elections are behind us. Imam Facchine, I mean, I think you were at the forefront, I think it's fair to say, in the conversations that were had within the Muslim community about how we should proceed during those elections. And at the very base of that conversation was to punish Kamala Harris. Are you satisfied with the result and the part the Muslim community played in gaining that result?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu rasulillah. That's a great question to start out with. I think in general, I am satisfied. Why do I say that? Because my main goal, or maybe start with my main fear, was that the Muslim community would buckle, that they would get cold feet at the end and they would run back to the Democrats. If we were thinking and we were making up scenarios before the election happened, what would be the worst case scenario for Muslim political power? It would be to make a whole bunch of noise about punishing genocide, and then for Muslims to chicken out and to run back to Harris and to essentially give her a promotion, promoting her from vice president to president, or being part of the administration that is responsible for the current genocide. That was the worst case scenario. When it comes to building power, when it comes to being taken seriously, when it comes to political maturation, and more. And so that didn't happen. And, you even saw groups like the USCMO. Some people don't know the United States Council of Muslim Organizations, the largest council of Muslim organizations in the US. They represent CARE and MAS and ICNA and MANA and MUNA and other major organizations like that. They released an endorsement. And even we have to, I think, look at where our wins are. Maybe somebody could argue that their endorsement was suboptimal. Essentially, they come out with a statement saying, do not vote for either Harris or for Trump, vote for any of the third parties. Some people would say, well, that's kind of weak. And there's an argument to that. However, I think what we should appreciate is that groups like CARE and all the other nonprofits in the Muslim space right now understand very well that their nonprofit status can be revoked under a Trump presidency very easily. And so I do respect that that was not a riskless statement to make for them to make. It ran against something of their immediate existential interests. So I think that the fact that those major organizations came out and gave such a statement running up to the elections, and that by and large, we always knew that there was going to be some Muslims that would vote Harris. A lot more Muslims voted Trump than we initially planned for. But the fact that the major orgs that have the most credibility and represent the community the best did not buckle, I think is a huge testament to progress. And I'll be, I am an optimist, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we are starting to develop and starting to mature a little bit politically. So in that sense, yes, we punished genocide. We did what we set out to do. We understood there would be risks. We understood what we were up against with the Trump presidency. We understand, the annexation of the West Bank, though it's already largely annexed de facto anyway. We understand, that Trump has terrible neocons that might, and it seems like, are having a very large influence, though Mobeen probably knows more about that than I do. There's many risks to a Trump presidency, but the greatest risk of all would be to demonstrate that we have no ability whatsoever to punish genocide, and therefore we would be sitting ducks no matter what administration was in power. So if that's my metric, then I'm saying that yes, it is the first step, and we have to be happy about that.
Imam, I mean, that's really interesting, and there is this apprehension, I suppose, Mobeen, in American society that yes, we punished a genocider, and certainly Kamala Harris and the Democrats perpetuated this horrible genocide. But in a sense, Trump is going to continue that with vigor. But also Trump comes, as I think Imam Tom alluded to, Trump comes with his own problems when it comes to the Muslim community, especially domestically. I mean, how do you evaluate those risks that Trump may give or bring to the Muslim community?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. It's difficult. It's difficult because what we're witnessing in front of us domestically is a very large political realignment within conservative ranks. Obviously, neither candidate was risk-free. With Trump, there are challenges and opportunities for the Muslim community, both domestically and abroad, when it comes to his international agenda. It remains to be seen how many of his campaign promises translate to anything material. This, in many ways, is reflective of what happened in the first Trump presidency. One of the things that's interesting, in my mind, if you go back and look at the first time he won the presidency and his campaigning, he ran on a platform of anti-immigration. That was really the issue that drove his victory the first time around. And a lot of what the media covered were his comments and sentiments, especially some of the more brazen, bombastic, sometimes even bigoted remarks about rapists and gang members and drug cartels coming across the border. It was that type of fear and hysteria that he drew on to build up his support base. This time around, his campaign was not centered on immigration the way it was in the past. Even the economy did not play a central role in his campaign. Arguably, one of the biggest issues he ran on was in open opposition to endless wars, in opposition to the neocon military-industrial complex. One of the biggest stories that was covered to scandalize Trump, the attempt to scandalize Trump, during the last week of before the election, were comments he made criticizing Liz Cheney. where he said, she thinks she's so tough. Why don't we send her out, give her some guns, let's see how tough she is when she's in the middle of battle and she has guns pointed at her. And you had a number of mainstream liberal media outlets that misconstrued that comment deliberately and represented it as Trump calling for her to be killed, right? But never, obviously, it didn't move the needle a whole lot amongst the electorate. But that type of open animosity and hostility to the neocon establishment, to Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, who he was attacking as publicly as anyone can attack. And Dick Cheney was once a symbol of conservatism, virtually untouchable 20 years ago. Dick Cheney was arguably the most credible figure amongst right-wing Republicans in this country. More than Donald Rumsfeld, people on the ground, especially Heartland America, really admired Dick Cheney more than George Bush. And to see him repudiating the Bush-Cheney doctrine in such an explicit way, I think was quite shocking to a lot of people. And to see the success that he had with it, not only more broadly amongst a broad plurality of the American public, but with Republicans themselves, is suggestive of really deep shifts within just conservative ranks across the board and what conservatism could potentially mean in the next 5 to 10 years. Again, there are really open questions as to how all of that's going to translate. First time around, Donald Trump did not run on his foreign policy credentials very strongly. He described the Iraq War as a disaster, but that was a sort of perfunctory comment as part of his larger platform last time around. It wasn't a centerpiece. He obviously wasn't a dove at all when it came to his foreign policy. He's very interventionist. This time around, he's appointed a bit of a mixed bag. So I think, like I said, that it's still sort of up in the air question. Even when it comes to American Muslims domestically, this time around, he ran a much more open campaign in trying to connect with the American Muslim community. He boasted his support from the Muslims for Trump coalition. He stood alongside those imams. In his victory speech, he mentioned Muslims for Trump. We have never in American history seen a president come out publicly proud of Muslim support in this way.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so I don't know, is this, again, I'm not naive to the
yeah.
world of politics and the way people are instrumentalized. I'm not necessarily saying all those decisions on their part was prudent. I'm simply saying that the idea that what we're invariably going to see is a sort of maximalist anti-Muslim bigotry materialized into or manifested into different political policies, that may not necessarily be the case. Right? I don't think people should expect all of their worst fears to come true in the next 4 years, because you never know what's going to happen with Trump, right? And you really don't know what's going to happen on the ground to destabilize our domestic order, because he is a bit of a chaos agent as well.
It's interesting, and I think there's a lot that we can't yet anticipate. But can we focus on, Imam Tom, what Mobeen raised there about Trump's foreign policy agenda? Now, it is fair to say that even in 2016, Donald Trump did talk about the globalist establishment, the liberal interventionists, and why he wanted to move away from that form of American foreign policy. And there are discussions about how when Trump was in power, he didn't start any new wars. In fact, he drew down in Afghanistan and in Syria, and he focused his attention more on the Far East rather than the Middle East, China rather than the Muslim world. I just wonder whether if we were to draw a Venn diagram, the Democrats would be these liberal interventionists, the conservative Republicans would be these neocons, typified by Cheney and the Bush administration and others. Is Donald Trump outside of that schema in your mind, or is there still an overlap between the Donald Trump agenda and the neocon liberal interventionist agenda of the left and right?
That's a great question. And I really like the way Mobeen framed everything in his last response, because I think that one of the things that we need to work on, I just thinking about for the audience's benefit here, is our imagination of what we're doing and some of the things that we have to keep track of, right? So a lot of times when people they start paying attention to an election that's imminent, they are operating with a framework that is dated or does not reflect the real movements that have been happening both on the left and the right since the last time the election rolled around. A lot of the things that people brought up regarding Trump and the right or the Republican Party were valid in 2016. They weren't necessarily valid in 2024. So it's really actually essential, I would say, for Muslim political strategy to pay attention to the shifts on the right and the shifts on the left, right? And to notice where things are headed. And that's how you are able to realize the opportunities that lay before you. Because just like Mobeen said, every single thing is risk and opportunity, risk and opportunity. In politics, you deal with scenarios, you deal with risks and opportunities. There's no qat'i situation where you're certain that anything's going to happen. You really just want to attempt to steer something. It's like a glacier that's moving. You do not have complete control over the glacier, but maybe if you put this barrier up here or you open up this pathway here, maybe you're able to shift a little bit the trajectory of the way that the glacier is flowing. So it's really interesting to see the shifts that have happened in the last 20 years on the right. I know, again, this is something Mobeen has more knowledge about, sort of the intelligentsia on the right and the different discursive movements. But to register the change from the incumbency and the hegemony of the neocons to the Tea Party movement and what the Tea Party movement did to the Republican Party, to now the current situation where, yeah, a lot of really important things that were not contested before are now contested. And even if, like, this is why it's more important to ask these questions than like, well, what's Trump going to do? Sometimes you need to go from, if you're going to like make a sequence of interventions, you have to go from something being consensus to something being contested. And then you go from something being contested to the thing that you're stumping for or advocating for seeming like common sense, self-evident, and these sorts of things. So the fact that the Overton window has shifted so much, specifically on Palestine, but also on the US's role abroad, is definitely an opportunity for Muslims to thoughtfully engage in. And even though there's no certainty in a lot of different directions. So where does Trump stand? Is it relevant where Trump stands? Right? That's another question. That Trump has his own agenda. Maybe he's got some donors that he has to please. Maybe he's concerned about his legacy. Maybe he's more transactional and egotistical, right? He might not have a concrete agenda. He might be feeling people out and feeling out what the public sentiment is going to be. I do tend to think my read on Trump is that Trump is more of an egotist than anything else, that he is more into himself and his own legacy than an ideologue. I do not think that Trump is an ideologue.
So you don't believe that "Make America Great Again," America First, sums up an ideology. It's rather a good tactical, electoral ploy.
I think that there is a base for America First. I think that there are a lot of conservative Americans that are America First, and you could make a typology of people on the right that America First would be a subcurrent within the right. However, Trump himself, I believe, is more subject to pressure points to what he thinks is going to be positive for his legacy, for how he's going to be perceived. He's indicated that he wants to be seen as some sort of big deal maker, right? He indicated that in his last time around. So that's the thing. If you're dealing with somebody who's not an ideologue, they're more of a transactionalist, then it becomes a little bit less relevant what their agenda is. And it becomes more relevant what pressure can you exert on that person in order to attempt to change or influence their behavior. At the end of the day, when it comes to strategic political thinking, you are attempting to change the behavior of political actors. And you need to reverse engineer, what do we have to do to achieve the X change in X political actor? So we need to think as a Muslim community now, okay, out of all the possibilities that exist, Trump could go this way, Trump could go that way, Trump could go that way. And as others have pointed out, it's not even a done deal when Trump appoints neocons. Look at what he did to Bolton and Pompeo last time he was in. He appointed neocons, and then he completely undermined them, right? So some people are looking like, oh, there, we told you, right? Like Trump's just as bad. He appointed so and so. Okay, well, yeah, maybe, but chaos agent, as Mobeen said, Trump is a chaos agent. He is extremely petty. He sets people against each other. He undermines people. This isn't arithmetic. It's not a linear sort of endeavor here. So we need to just think about what are the interventions that we can make in order to attempt to shift where things are going. I hope I didn't duck your question, but
No, it's a good answer. And Mobeen, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, no, I'll just add a few things there. I think one of the things that Trump does in destabilizing the domestic order is that he inflames a lot of latent tensions. And that makes it very difficult to actually operate effectively internationally because you're constantly mired in controversy on the ground. So if you think about what we could see in the near term with a Trump presidency that could cause a lot of angst with people on the ground. One, you have this Department of Government Efficiency, right, being headed by Elon Musk and Vivek, receiving a lot of attention. They're speaking very openly about cutting tremendous number of government jobs and scaling down the entire size of the federal government, including the Department of Defense. And Hegsfeld, who's been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, has been a huge critic of defense overspend. A lot of attention is being placed on the number of times the DoD has failed internal financial audits. What all that means remains to be seen. But if you're talking about mass layoffs across the government and reduced spend in the DoD, you're going to have a lot of consternation on your hands. You have a number of figures that are extremely partisan and polarizing that are being nominated to positions. People like RFK at the HHS, Dr. Oz now taking over CMS, Linda McMahon as the head of the Secretary of Education. Again, these can all very quickly materialize into really, really active domestic struggles and fights on the ground that we could see. So when you talk about the type of chaos he might introduce the next 3 to 6 months domestically, it could be substantial, right? You think about his first presidency and all of the protests that were taking place on the ground. Again, it's really difficult to execute foreign wars effectively when you're dealing with all of this. In some ways, you're preoccupied with what's going on in your own borders. To Imam Tom's point, the neocon question is a really interesting one when it comes to the America First agenda. If you look, Donald Trump, towards the end of his campaign, was campaigning alongside the neocons. Mike Pompeo was part of his administration last time, Secretary of State. Mike Pompeo was with him on the campaign trail. Mike Pompeo reportedly lost about 100 pounds since the last time he was with Trump, over the past 4 years. Trump's, when he was campaigning and speaking, could not stop talking about how great Pompeo looked and how, he's lost so much weight, this and that. Yeah, he really liked Mike Pompeo. It was very clear that, he makes very vain decisions at times, but he liked Mike Pompeo. That much was clear. The early rumors as well were that Nikki Haley was going to be part of a Trump administration, same way she was last time. First week after the election, he tweets out, and this is very rare, right? Presidents typically don't issue any statements about people who aren't going to be part of their administration. They typically only announce people who are going to be part of them. And he pushes out a statement saying, Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo are not going to be part of my administration. You have a popular libertarian comic named Dave Smith, who has over 500,000 followers online on Twitter. He has been one of the biggest voices against Israel and has conducted and participated in more than one debate, including against Dennis Prager, on the question of Israel and criticizing Israel for its conduct against Palestinians. So he's a very interesting voice to follow on that topic overall. He's Jewish, but very principled and quite good on the topic. Not perfect, but very good, I think, on balance. He had a bit of a rant that went viral that he did against militarism, the military-industrial complex, foreign wars. That video not only goes viral in its short clip, it is amplified by Elon Musk, who's in Trump's inner circle, and Don Jr., Donald Trump's son, who says, absolutely right, we need to make sure that we keep the neocons at bay and don't allow them in this administration. Charlie Kirk, who's part of the inner circle, responds to that comment as well, supporting it. So now you have all these people who are part of Trump's inner circle who are saying we need to keep the neocons out. When Trump starts forming his cabinet and assigning people, you have early rumors about, well, who's he going to nominate for Secretary of State? The Marco Rubio rumor comes out one day, and you have people literally on Twitter congratulating Marco Rubio. Trump, on his official Truth Social platform, does not issue a statement about Marco Rubio, and he doesn't announce it. Over 2 days go by with no announcement. And in the meantime, media outlets have already announced it. You have many people have come out celebrating this announcement, Ben Shapiro and others. Trump still hasn't announced it. When he finally announces Marco Rubio, he simultaneously announces Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, and he does them both simultaneously, which tells you there must have been, and widely reported, huge internal fights over the Marco Rubio appointment. Tulsi Gabbard has a reputation of being anti-war. During Trump's first administration, she was a heavy critic of Trump. She said that Trump did not govern as someone who was against endless wars. She criticized him for killing Qasem Soleimani, and she said it was illegal and unjustified. Very difficult positions to take. She came out on those types of issues. Is she going to continue? Who knows, right? Michael Tracy has documented quite extensively the types of flip-flops she's capable of making in the interests of, political advancement. Nevertheless, I think there's a symbolic and political significance to some of these choices and the way in which we're seeing the machinations of these decisions, what's going on behind the scenes, and what's coming out in front of us alongside that.
I mean, that's really, really interesting. I want to, so that's the politics of it all. And as we know, things are unfolding, and nothing's very clear when it comes to Donald Trump and the way he acts. And as I think Imam Tom quite rightly pointed out, even those neocons, those militarists in his first administration, many of them were removed from power, especially if we think about General Kelly and Trump's unilateral decision almost to remove troops from Syria. The defense secretary at the time was unaware of that decision before it was announced. So I think he's a mercurial person. But I want to ask about the deeper strains within American society. Now, we, on the Thinking Muslim, we frame America, and I think you both have done this in your own way. We frame America as an empire, and this empire is in trouble internally. Those who had historically supported this empire and its policies and its external activity around the world from 1945 onwards, the American population today, you can see enormous strains and tensions within that population. So, Imam Tom, can you, in a way, just outline those tensions that exist in American society amongst the left and the right, and whether we're seeing, whether there is an intellectual balkanization almost of American society now, where you've got divisions that are so acute. American citizens no longer see eye to eye on some of the fundamentals that will be required to uphold this empire.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll tackle it twofold. Put on my Karl Marx hat and deal with the base and then the superstructure, because I do think just beyond people's ideological leanings or convictions, you have really a population that has been squeezed, that this empire business has exploited and downgraded the quality of life of the vast majority of American people in really acute ways. It was funny when I visited you in Kensington, which is one of the more posh districts in London. And I'm more familiar with Kensington, Philadelphia, which is known as Zombieland, where you find addicts, people shooting up, needles on the ground, fentanyl and tranquilizers spread everywhere. That this is the America that you talk to people and they're like, empire what? Like what is all of our expenditures actually going to? That the U.S. empire it's a grift, right? It's a racket in the sense that you have a very, very small percentage of the population at the top that has their stocks are in Nvidia and their stocks are in Raytheon, and they're into the weapons industry, they're into the fossil fuels industry, and they make a lot of money on the endless wars, and they make a lot of money, and they base their careers on them. And then the American people have been getting poorer and poorer with no healthcare system that functions. People are afraid of having to go to the hospital in the United States. One of the most common sources of debt is medical debt. And depending on where you're at in the country, hospitals can attempt to dock your wages or to come after you if you're not able to pay your exorbitant medical fees. College has been university degrees have been completely, they've followed the neoliberal model to the point where a university is a scam. University is a scam in the United States. Tuition, you're going to leave with hundreds of thousands of dollars debt, and you're going to have a degree that won't get you very much on the market. Competition is so high and jobs availability is so low that everybody's feeling pinched. Unless you're in the absolute elite in this country, everybody's feeling pinched when it comes across the board. Inflation, food prices, rents, and the prices of property. Like every single major thing that determines your quality of life and your ease of life, Americans have been getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed more and more and more since probably the 50s or the 60s. It's happened slowly, but there are serious cracks. There are serious cracks that make the promise of spreading democracy abroad, or whatever was the ideological justification that maybe had a little bit of resonance back in the 90s and then a little bit less resonance in the early 2000s. It falls on deaf ears these days. Who cares about spreading democracy abroad? Obviously, that's a lie. It was never what was happening. But even for the people who might not be so sophisticated that they can deconstruct that bit of propaganda, who cares? And this is falling on more and more deaf ears. So if you look at the base, there's really significant challenges to the sustainability of the American project of empire. And then if you look ideologically, yes, as well, that again, thinking about tracking the changes that have taken place in the last 20, 25 years, or even 30 years on the left and the right, everything significantly, there has been one foreign policy between the Democrats and Republicans since Clinton, probably. That this has been, when the third way Democrats came along and they decided that they're going to lean into being out Republican the Republicans and take the middle, and that they're not going to be as distinct from the right as perhaps they could be. That sort of new democratic movement and the neocons, there has been very much a consensus one way. But the things that have shifted, so we already talked about the shifts on the right with after the neocons, the Tea Party revolution, and the different strains of American isolationism and America First that have really, I think, increased and become more popular. And what are the shifts on the left? The left has only gone into LGBTQ ideology, DEI initiatives, very heavy-handed, alienating, resent-producing, authoritarian measures. And so, yes, people are very divided, but I see America as people extremely dissatisfied. And I think that the average person is extremely dissatisfied with the way things that are going, to the point where it seems like what the government is prioritizing and doing almost is nonsensical, which is why you have a lot of disengagement, a lot of disempowerment, disenfranchisement. But I do think that these shifts are really important. I think that they present a tremendous opportunity. I think 20 years ago, you have much less chance and opportunity when it comes to making a meaningful intervention and attempting to steer certain developments both on the left and the right. Right now, it remains to be seen whether the left or the Democrats are going to have a meaningful introspection due to their tremendous collapse on election day. But if they do, then that is also an opportunity. Where does the Democratic Party go from here? Is it sustainable to remain an elitist DEI, LGBTQ supporting outfit? A lot of people have criticized within the left or within the Democratic Party, because I know the leftists will criticize me for conflating the two, but they're not as different as you might think. That they will say that the Democrats lost connection with the working class, which is absolutely true. So it remains to be seen. Do they take this as a moment of introspection and attempt to change the identity politics? Is now there's doubt in the identity politics whether it's going to work. There's doubt in if you can just mobilize people based off of fear or abortion and immigration, which is what the Democrats always attempted to just bring everything back to. So these might represent tremendous opportunities going forward.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Can I zoom out a little bit and can we have a conversation about the Muslim community moving forward? Like, to what extent was this an election where we punished a political party for committing genocide? And there's very little more one can do, at least at a federal level, at a national level, to move the dial for Islam, for Muslim favorable policies. Or do the two of you see what was accomplished as almost like a springboard to something a little bit more, a little bit more effective in the future? Like, is there a positive agenda here when it comes to political participation moving forward? I mean, Mobeen first, please.
I think that it's a potential spring forward to sustainable change. One of the things that has happened over the past year is that you've seen certain developments within the American Muslim community that probably should have happened a long time ago, but it required a sort of social and communal crisis to bring them together. So you're beginning to see more institutional collaboration in ways that we haven't in the past. We're starting to see the conscientious deliberation of how Muslims can more effectively acquire power in this country and use the type of economic weight that they possess to advance their interests. So you're seeing more people come together within the tech space. You're seeing venture capital grow in the Muslim community. You're seeing a growth in entrepreneurship, asset management, investments. You're seeing Muslims come together within fields like law. So broader coalitions of Muslim attorneys trying to figure out how they can participate in protecting Muslim interests when they're on the docket. You're starting to see Muslims come together in the arts and figuring out that we need to produce our own cultural artifacts. Some people may say too little, too late, but nevertheless, better late than never. I think I think there are a couple of things that we are continuing to see, but are still a work in progress. I think one is after 9/11, you had a post 9/11 consensus that emerged within the Muslim community in response to the war on terror and the aggressive national security apparatus that was developed after that, or alongside that, rather. And that political consensus was essentially Democrats are our friends, Republicans are not. We have to vote, align ourselves in a moment of existential need, collectively and uniformly with the left against the right. Obviously, the contours of politics has changed dramatically since then, and we're starting to see more of a realignment in political diversity within our community. We are going to have to reckon with that going forward. We're not going to have a conservative community. We're not going to have a liberal community. We're going to have a community that has a lot more political diversity than it's had in the past. It's going to be very difficult to produce a community that votes collectively as a bloc. And so how we tolerate people who have radically different politics when it comes to elections, again, something that remains to be seen, but I think it's going to remain a source of considerable tension within our communities itself, because these political parties tend to be sources of considerable friction, right? People are very passionate about their politics, especially given the role that politics plays. How do we navigate that? That's a challenge. But again, as we say, every challenge is an opportunity. It may mean that we can begin forming different types of coalitions. It means we can start participating in different types of spaces. It means we can start trying to levy our power or the resources that we have at our disposal in ways that others haven't. One of the things I've commented on, and it's been something I've been reviewing over the past few weeks, is that's perhaps a bit surprising to me, is how much money it takes to influence politicians. If you look at Donald Trump's major donors, I think he has 3 donors that gave him 100 million or more. Musk, Adelson, and like some other guy, I can't remember his name. After that, you have someone that gave 50 million, and then you get 20 million, and everyone else is 10 or less. Linda McMahon gave 20 million. She's now the Secretary of Education, right? It's a pay-to-play system. That's how this thing works. $10 million, $10 million to advance your interests is not a crazy amount of money to put together. You know, I don't know whether it's prudent. I don't know whether we should even want to play at this level, given sort of the brazen corruption of it all. But if you think about some of the interests that Muslims could potentially advance for a couple of million, I think they're very achievable. And I think these are things that perhaps matter a lot more to the Muslim community than any politician on Capitol Hill, right? You think about the issues like Imran Khan remaining in prison and trying to affect his situation. You think about things like Sheikh Salman Auda still being incarcerated and trying to secure his release. Think about trying to reduce some of the pressure being applied to different Muslim countries. I don't think these are hard things to try to get across the aisle. If Muslims organize themselves and they use their financial resources to say, you know what, willing to back your campaign, you're desperate for money, you have a couple of million we can throw your way, but here's the issue we want you to advance. And this is the thing that we're looking to secure. So these are opportunities, the idea. I'm not even necessarily saying that we should. I'm simply saying that this is the system today.
Well,
that seems to be how other people are playing within it.
Yeah, no, that's very intriguing. I mean, Imam Tom, in a sense, that conversation may sit slightly. We may be quite uncomfortable with that conversation because it does look like a modeling of the behavior of some of the big corporates, or at least the Zionist lobby, where you use your monetary power in order to, in effect, buy the system. I know that's not what Mobeen is saying, but that I could imagine that some of our audience will say, well, do we really want to go down that road, or can we maintain? And again, this is fraught with lots of difficulties to say, but can we maintain some sort of ethical standard when it comes to engaging with the political system?
Of course, everything that we do is ethical, but it's also strategic. I mean, the fuqaha have mentioned that it's permissible to pay a rishwa if you have to pay a rishwa in order to extract your right. And essentially, the way that politics works in the United States, as being just highlighted, is legalized rishwa. It's legalized bribery. That's what lobbying is. If we were to give a very, very frank definition of lobbying, it's legalized bribery. So there's, it's not necessarily that this is out of bounds. And I think that is a very important milestone in our maturation. Now, there might be other ways, and we might have to look at the opportunities of those other ways, or work on all of them simultaneously as various fronts. Usually what I say when dealing with, because that's a very perennial question people are asking about, what about a Muslim APAC? Yeah, that's one way. One way is to attempt to build something similar, which we could do. Mobeen's 100% right. We have the money. If you look at their expenditures, it's not that crazy. If you look at the ROI, it is crazy. Like the amount of that you get in return, given how much you actually put in, is well worth it. That is something. And I should also say that if we're serious about a Muslim APAC, then it's going to have to put money in both the left and the right, just as APAC does, as they prefer to primary somebody within their own party as opposed to let it go to general election. That is something absolutely that we should start considering doing, where we would rather primary a Zionist Republican with an anti-Zionist America First Republican or a Libertarian, and put money behind that person. We would rather that they get the party nomination, even if they lose the general. And the same thing on the left. Same thing with the Democrats. We would rather put money behind an anti-Zionist Democrat going against the Zionist Democrat. Absolutely, we should be doing that. There's other ways to curtail the influence of APAC and even the entire phenomenon of this legalized bribery that should also be pursued, but are more long-term. So there's FARA enforcement, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or whatever it stands for, something similar to that, where APAC and the Israeli lobby should be registered under that, and it would restrict a bit of what they can do. That's another route. There's Campaign Finance and Citizens United in general, which basically opened the door, or we should say blew the doors off any restrictions of financial contributions to these campaigns. That do Muslims have a long-term interest in reversing? I think so. I think that would make these sorts of things more fair. And if the Catholics can plan for 70 years to reverse Roe versus Wade, we can absolutely plan and make a 20-year or a 30-year plan to reverse Citizens United. Like, that's the thing. People, unfortunately, I think I should put this in the positive, that people are slowly starting to realize with the Muslim community that everything is plastic. Everything is movable. Nothing is set in stone and is going to last forever. It literally is. It just requires a certain input energy or a certain price to get behind it and to push and to strategize and to figure out the way to do it. But everything is up for grabs if you're willing to put your activity into it.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'll just add to that. I think one of the significant or major differences that obviously we would want to embody is that we're always embodying our values. Right? We're not leaving our principles at the door.
Yes.
In fact, one of the things that I have found is that Muslim groups who actually do political participation right can have a tremendous effect on da'wah. So I've heard of many stories of people who do local political outreach in different regions of America, where sometimes you'll have a staffer of a politician who just becomes enamored with Islam, and some of them end up accepting Islam. We had locally a young person who was the head in Maryland of the Young Republican Coalition, who ended up accepting Islam a few years ago and took his shahada because he reached out to the Muslim community and he was so impressed with the type of principles and values that Muslims were upholding. He started learning about Islam. He studied it theologically, came to the community and said, "I'm ready to convert." All right. So these types of things can happen. And we've seen that on both sides of the aisle, where people actually get exposed to the truth and values of Islam and say, wow, there's something really incredible here. And I think the imperative of da'wah is always going to loom over any political activity that we do. And I think the type of lobbying work, that's simply a component of it, right? You always need to have a multifaceted agenda. If you look at different conservative organizations, for instance, one that has been receiving a little bit of attention as of late is a group called American Moment. It's headed by two young people. One of the guys who's the head of it, his name's Saurabh Sharma, young Indian guy. They're more aligned with Trump's America First agenda, so sort of J.D. Vance crowd. J.D. Vance is one of the people who endorsed them, helped them start it up. Their goal is to capture people between the ages of 25 and 35 and help them get positions within different political administrations so that 10, 15, 20 years from now, they are the ones calling the shots behind the scene. His part of his argument is the deep state is not a stable entity. We can become part of the deep state and begin to advance our interests, but it has to start somewhere. And we have a network. We can help coach people. We can help develop their connections on Capitol Hill. We can train them to get into these roles and positions, and we can advocate for them behind the scenes to get their foot in the door. Establish a beachhead where these people can grow. We're in constant contact with them. We're helping mentor them along the way. Once they're able to advance into those positions, they can start affecting change in ways that they may not be able to in lower level positions. Again, it takes time. That's a piece of a strategy. The idea is that if you think about the long game for Muslims, we need to think about what that strategy looks like for us. That remains to be seen. Up till now, what we've done a lot of is civil rights activity that's been reactionary in the face of aggressive Islamophobia. Although that's all well and good, as I've mentioned before, the complexion of politics has changed considerably since those days. And the way in which we participate in society has to adjust. It simply cannot be a recapitulation of post 9/11 civil rights activism that it remains sort of reactionary and single-minded on a handful of pet issues, which may still be active but aren't nearly as live as they once were. Things like the no-fly list and stuff like that.
I mean, can I ask you then about the role of Islam, the role of the Sharia? Where are our red lines? Because I think there's a criticism that a brother recently posed to me as someone who is involved with sort of the electoral politics on a UK level and elsewhere. And he said the following, that when it comes to even learned Muslims who are engaged in the electoral process, there seems to be an embrace of Machiavellianism, and there's not a positive explanation of where the Islamic red lines are. And so a young Muslim who may want to get involved with politics has very little to guide them at the moment. There are very few guardrails for them. I just wonder, Imam Tom, is that a fair criticism of where we are? I get it that we've been firefighting, and in many ways, that positive statement of the Islam and the Sharia and what those guardrails are has not been made because we've just not had the opportunity to make it. But moving forward, is there a need really to do that?
Absolutely. I think that what you said is very important, and what the brother is saying is also very important. That we're reacting to a genocide, so we have not transcended a reactionary state yet, unfortunately. Though I think that we're, for the first time, maybe paying attention in such a way that we'll get there. But there's no doubt that for a lot of us, we really only started paying attention after October 7th. That the horrors of the last year plus have shocked us. And so a lot of that is reactionary. However, I think that what is different this time around, as Mobeen was saying, is that this does not seem like 9/11. This seems very different. It seems like the Muslim community is maturing, and we are ready to move beyond reactionary politics, which will require an articulation and an Islamic articulation of not just Islamic values and platforms, but red lines, like you're saying, principles, and these things. This is something that I've been working on quite a bit. Obviously, it's very preliminary, but it's very, very important. Perhaps it is one of the most important tasks. It's true. We're not materialists, so we're not going to make our calculus like materialists would. However, a lot of people, they are surprised at some of the tactics or strategies that even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used in warfare and in other scenarios that I am afraid that some people would write off as Machiavellian. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-harb khud'a," that warfare is deception. And there are examples where, for example, before the Battle of Badr started, where he, alayhi salatu wasalam, he walked out of sight from his own army and he encountered a Bedouin, and he asked the Bedouin, "Where is the Muslim army?" And he was acting as if he was not part of the Muslim army. And then when the Bedouin responded accurately, because the Prophet ﷺ knew where his army was, then the Prophet ﷺ learned from him that he was able to trust this person, which then he asked the real question that he wanted an answer to, which is, where was the army of the Quraysh? So if somebody is looking at that scenario, is that Machiavellian? Somebody could say yes, but we find that squarely within divine guidance and revelation and approval. We have similar examples after the Battle of Uhud, where the Prophet ﷺ, the first thing that he did was he galvanized the Muslim army and rallied them to pursue the Quraysh into the desert as they retreated. Now, this was a complete bluff because they were really hurting and they did not have any reinforcements. In fact, if the Quraysh had decided to engage them, they might not have survived. However, the point was to spook them into thinking that they had reinforcements. And that is, in fact, exactly what happened. The Quraysh believed the bluff. They fell for the bluff that the Muslims had reinforcements, and they continued their retreat all the way back to Mecca. So people, this entire thing needs built. It needs to be built out, and it needs articulation. However, we also have to realize that people, unfortunately, we live in a secular society, and most of us have a bit of secular thinking. So we might have an idealized imagination of what Islamic politics might look like, that these types of things that happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ are not part of an idealized Islam, that they seem Machiavellian, they seem, like dirty tricks or something like that. So we need to be careful to not fall into this bifurcation of, well, there's secular dirty politics over here, and then there's idealized Islam over here. And we need to actually look at the tradition and say, this is the scope in which we're allowed to act. And this is fully Islamic, and we're allowed to do that. Even the example of paying a rishwa, paying a bribe in order to get your haqq, which is something well established in the books of fiqh. This goes against people who might say, oh, well, the system's all corrupt, so we can't do anything about it. Well, what's your understanding about what Islam is that you would say that you can't touch it or you can't participate in it whatsoever? Right. So we need to drill down on these things, and we do need to articulate these things.
Mobeen, building on that and the Islamic premise of our political activism, I gave a lecture recently, or a presentation at a masjid, and a couple of Muslims responded by saying that if you focus too much on electoral politics, you forget about the other areas where you actually can have a greater influence on Muslim community, whether that's da'wah or whether that's working in local communities, whether that's youth work. And what may happen is the risk is you end up neglecting some of these really important building blocks of building a community which reflects Islam. Like, how do you see electoral politics within the scheme of diaspora Muslims who are trying to fundamentally keep their identity and keep close to their deen as we traverse the challenges that we face?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think oftentimes, and I would probably agree with that critique overall. I do think at times people invest a lot of psychological and emotional energy into the presidential election in particular. And I think they allow themselves to be emotionally overwhelmed at times by outcomes. I see a lot of that sort of outpouring online, especially from younger people who are very impressionable and maybe more politically engaged or activated at younger ages because of how consuming politics can be, especially the electoral politics every 4 years. I think nevertheless, even if you're thinking about bringing about certain types of changes, it's not as if change simply occurs through the ballot, right? Change is multifaceted. There's top-down change, but there's also bottom-up change. And we have to do the work of trying to establish cultural change through whatever mechanisms and means we have at our disposal. Amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar is an imperative that looms over every single Muslim, which is commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Every single person has to participate in that project in some capacity. Now, what that means for somebody is going to be different. Some people are going to be active within that space by teaching the Quran and being active in madaris or their local masjid. Others are going to be producing cultural artifacts, media. And I think what Muslims should not do is underestimate the possibilities that are in front of them. If you look at cultural change that's happened outside of the Muslim community by individual actors, oftentimes these people weren't very impressive. It's not like they had huge platforms, and it just grew, right? Someone like Joe Rogan, who's, I think today, the most popular podcaster, certainly in America. When he started his podcast, he was a D-list celebrity. He would just, put videos of himself with his friends when he's smoking weed, talking about sort of extemporaneously different topics. It's not as if he had billions of dollars behind him. It was a low budget production, and it grew. And it grew to the point now where, presidential candidates are coming on his show. Mashallah, think about the thinking Muslim and where it's come. Jill Stein appeared on your program. That's not trivial or inconsequential. Right? The fact that she came on your program to try to appeal for votes. Right? And you think about when the Thinking Muslim started and the way it was, sort of working at that time, that we have platforms that are growing. And we have people who are doing work, and that work is seeping out to more than just them. I think about the effect that some of my writings have had. I've received letters from a large number of non-Muslims around the world who follow my writings, and sometimes will offer very thoughtful comments about things they agree or disagree with. And I'll find myself engaged in lengthy back and forths with some of them. I've received emails from people literally in monasteries right now. Said, I came across your article. I just wanted to thank you for it. And it's really interesting. You really don't know what type of effect you can have by trying to contribute to advancing some good in the world around us. And so when I think about Muslim public participation, I think there's so much that we have at our disposal to do, whether that's social work and relief work, whether it's helping advance sort of the agenda of stronger families and communities. When we think about education and da'wah, we have our work cut out for us. Right? We have a lot to do. Politics is simply one of those domains and arenas, and it becomes that much more important simply because of the way in which it affects the global order, especially for American Muslims. We have to recognize the role that America plays around the globe as the global hegemon. And we have to be invested, I believe, at a greater level than others in trying to counteract that influence. We have to, because we're in the belly of the beast. And people say, well, we have an opportunity here because of all the privileges we have in this and that. Well, yeah, we also have a greater burden. And that burden means that we have to try to stand up against this machine before it continues to wreak havoc on our brothers and sisters around the world.
Yeah, just
Not only add to that,
yeah,
if I may just
please,
add
Imam,
just
yeah.
one tiny addition, which is that I think that the opportunity that electoral politics offers is to politicize people, right? So, using it as a gateway or a funnel to much more sustainable, holistic, and broad political action. That's when, for better or worse, the circus of it, the theater of it, makes a lot of people pay attention that normally don't pay attention. So there's an opportunity there to try to politicize newcomers into other avenues of action that going forward after that. So one of the things that we're doing here is to try to now focus on across the board to make a 2-year plan. I've gathered sort of some of the people that have gotten politicized in this last election cycle, and now develop a 2-year plan. There's the midterm elections coming up. Most people fall asleep and ignore the midterm elections. There's tremendous opportunity for Muslims in the midterm elections, but we start planning now. We start planning now to even just map out how do certain decisions get made, at what level of government, who's in charge here, when are people up for re-election, what are their profiles, what are their platforms, or even, like we said, the cultural front. There's so many different fronts, but the idea is to just keep the momentum going. What we don't want to have happen is that after an election happens and people they're venting online, they're venting on WhatsApp groups, and then they just move on with their lives. We need to have opportunities for people to plug into that are going to keep that fire going throughout the year. And there are things to do in schools. There are things to do with media and with culture. There's lots of opportunities out there.
Yeah, and on the midterm election front, I mean, this is the type of thing where you start thinking strategically and say, okay, this is an opportunity where midterm elections tend to have smaller turnouts. Your ability to actually turn an election, especially locally within a district or a county, much higher. You're getting involved with politicians who are careerists. 10, 15, 20 years from now, they could be state senators, but they're starting off their campaign with some district position. And you're getting involved in building relationships with them before they have an APAC handler, right? Before they've been totally compromised in this role. Most of these people did not start off their congressional careers with strong convictions on the question of Israel. You're talking about 535 members of Congress. These people are all over the board when they start off their careers. now a lot of their positions on those types of issues are reified, right? And that's happened through years and years of prolonged exposure and dependence on particular lobbies, right? And Zionist lobbies. And so if we can sort of precede those moments and try to affect these people longer term, like that's one of the things that we stand to benefit from.
Well, Jazakallah khair. I think we've had a really interesting conversation, and I very much like the framing of this conversation that you guys in America in particular, you have a greater responsibility to question and critique this empire. And, for a long time, I think from where I'm standing at least, I found that generally across the West, but in particular, American Muslims have, I suppose, swallowed that US exceptionalism pill. And until now, it just seemed to me that there wasn't this desire to use the various levers available to you to question this empire. So I think it's a really interesting place that I think Muslims are at, and possibly as closing remarks, guys. I mean, Gaza has, I think, woken us all up in every sphere, right? But I suspect its impact on the American Muslim psyche has been pretty enormous. It seems to me. Is that a fair reading, Mobeen and Tom, of the impact that Gaza has had?
Oh yeah, I think the days of American Muslim conferences with a bunch of American flags on stage and the singing of the national anthems and all that, like that, those days have got to end, right?
Really?
Like those days we've got to move past those days. And I think, frankly, there are a lot of paradoxical possibilities that, we should look out for with Trump, where potentially America's standing globally is weakened. And that could be to the collective benefit of many Muslims around the world. And the extent to which we can help sort of turn things insular, retreat from trying to police the entire world, reduce, military spending, run amok. All those types of things are things that we have vested interests in. So I think American Muslims' relationship to this country, to its sort of jingoistic arm and the nationalistic impulses that some continue to possess, like we've got to really critique that heavily. And that's an ongoing project, right? The pull of nationalism, in fact, even higher order critiques, liberalism, secularism, like these are all dialogues and discourses that we have to work on simultaneously, where we have our high order critiques, and then we're dealing with the system as it is and maneuvering within it and figuring out how to be effective instrumentally while trying to reorient ourselves for the long run.
I absolutely agree. And I think that one of the most hopeful things is that from my anecdotal experience, I've been able to travel a bit around the country in the last year, is that the American Muslim community is ready for a new era. That I do not see this as post 9/11. I do not see people being afraid. I do not see people. I think that after 9/11, many people thought that if we were just the model minority that was as likable as possible, turned fully to relief work, that we would be safe. And October 7th and what happened after taught people that that's not true, that you will never be safe if you don't build power. And so I see now a really unique opportunity for the Muslim American community. It almost feels as if all the organizations that we have, may Allah reward them for all the work they've done, it almost feels like they aren't sufficient anymore. It almost feels like we're ready for something new. That, just like Mobeen was saying, the typical annual conferences that happen just have less meaning. They feel more hollow. So we really, I think, are at the precipice of potentially something really positive, of a new generation of organizations, a new generation of leadership, a new generation of strategic action that's going to do these things and take that duty and that unique, exceptional duty and responsibility and accountability of Muslims in the United States of America more seriously, and attempt to make an intervention in the way things are happening that will be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a boon to Muslims worldwide.
Well, Jazakallah khair to the two of you. It's been a really fascinating conversation. And are there any further plans for you to come to the UK? I'm sure, I know maybe we missed one another the last time you were here, but Imam Tom, we we had an enjoyable time in South London and beyond.
We did. I'll come to the other Kensington, and I think late January, inshallah, I'll be coming to the UK. So we'll be in touch about that, and then maybe one more time in 2025.
Inshallah ta'ala. Mobeen, any plans from your side?
No plans on my side right now. So
Inshallah. Well, it's great to have you both on the show, and Jazakallah khair. And I think there's a lot to be hopeful for, it seems to me, moving forward. So it's wonderful to hear from you both.